Hi, welcome back to part 2 of this, my extended director's cut of my GDC talk on 30 puzzle design lessons from classic puzzle communities and how those lessons can be applied to the creation of video game puzzles. The 11th lesson is create a rewarding ending. And the quintessential example of this is the puzzle Picross, aka Nonograms, which the Picross games have been published by Nintendo since the 90s, and I think the first Nonograms were published in the late 80s in various Japanese puzzle magazines. There's an interesting story about the origin of them. They were created by two different authors seemingly simultaneously. But alas, one of the exciting things about Nonograms is at the end you sort of get this picture, and there's always this question like, what is the picture going to be? Anticipation for sort of that exciting moment where the picture or the identity of the picture, what is it? Oh, it's a rubber duck, it's a lion, is finally revealed. Another example is this puzzle Spiral Galaxies, which it doesn't have an ending surprise step at the end, but a variant of it does. And I will show you the classic first. So this is the classic Spiral Galaxies. The goal is to partition the grid into these regions, each of which contains exactly one dot, and the shape of the region is rotationally symmetric, 180 degrees around that dot. It's a very interesting puzzle. There's a lot of fascinating logic that goes into solving them. But another similar type of puzzle, which is printed by Nikoli under the name Tentaisho, which is a hilarious pun if you know Japanese. Taisho means symmetry, and ten means symmetry about a point. But Tentai also means sort of a heavenly body like a galaxy. So this is a show of heavenly bodies. Excellent pun. Anyways, digression. This was first published in Nikoli magazine in 2001 by an author who goes by Gesaku, and it's essentially a Spiral Galaxies puzzle where some of the dots are dark colored, and if you shade the dark colored dots, you get a shape. And here's a more sophisticated example, quite a large instance. When you solve it, you get this, and the shape is that of an astronaut. Quite an interesting composition that's been put together. And you might ask, well, is the puzzle boring because of this? Does this sort of compromise the flow of the puzzle because you're having to make all of these regions fit together in exactly this way? And the answer is mostly not. Like, if you look over to the left side of this puzzle, you can kind of see there's really elaborate snaking and winding regions going all over the place. And those are quite interesting to solve and to sort of figure out the logic of how that must be shaped. However, putting those in sort of requires large amounts of just one color of region, and that can sort of force the design. If you wanted to make a QR code into this, then probably most of the puzzle would be relatively uninteresting to solve. It relies or depends heavily on the shape being a certain way. Here's an example that kind of illustrates that. This is, I'm just putting this together to show off. It's GDC 2021, but this is actually made using a text generator by Eric and Martin Domain, and it shows, you can do whatever you want with these Tentaisho puzzles, but this is the 2, and it's just a diagonal set of 1x1 things. It's not particularly interesting or fun to solve. Another example of putting a surprise at the end of the puzzle are the extraction steps that occur in puzzle hunts like the MIT Mystery Hunt, where every single puzzle has a solution that is a word or a phrase, and often those are used in meta puzzles or other things. Here's a Tentaisho puzzle whose answer is actually a 5-letter word, and if you solve it, you get this. And maybe you can guess what the 5-letter word answer is. Of course, it is clubs. This is by Pavel Curtis from his blog Etological Enigma, which has a lot of interesting puzzles that have a word or phrase as an answer. The extraction steps have a couple of values. They provide this additional final eureka moment, which can be especially exciting if you're anticipating it or there's a little bit of a surprise at the end. They also exploit the peak end rule, which means, the things that people tend to remember the most are sort of the peak or the most salient part of an experience, as well as the ending or the last thing. And so if the last part of an experience is somehow exciting or memorable, then overall the experience will be viewed more positively. And so that's true of puzzles like these. It also can create setups for meta puzzles where words like clubs can be used as ingredients in another puzzle. And many puzzle hunts like MIT Mystery Hunt are set up with these meta puzzles that are sort of like boss puzzles, where there might be 12 other puzzles you need to solve, and then you take those 12 words and you use them to solve this final puzzle, and maybe only 8 to 10 of those 12 are actually needed. So it can create a sort of progression gate where you don't necessarily need to solve everything, but you need to solve most of it. And that can be very, very useful for pacing and structuring a puzzle hunt. Lesson number 12 is to embed secrets and surprises. And this is sort of another way of cramming more eureka moments into the same puzzle. I'll show you one example from cryptic crosswords. These things are called ninas, and they are sort of little Easter eggs hidden in a puzzle. In this puzzle, if you read the words going around the outside, or the letters, it will say Monty Python's Flying Circus, sort of going sequentially around the border of the puzzle. And this is known as a Nina. The name Nina comes from Al Hirschfeld, he was a comic author in the US, and Nina is the name of his daughter. And here you can see the word Nina is actually hidden in the hair of this character 3 separate times. You can see the N-I-N-A. And he signs his name with a little 3 next to it, indicating that there are 3 Ninas hidden in this one particular comic. And he did this throughout his career after his daughter was born. And so Ninas are essentially the untracked secrets or Easter eggs of UK crosswords. And one feature of them that's very notable is that they are missable. You could go through this entire crossword, solve the whole thing, think you were done, and not even realize there was something there. Is this a problem, or is it a feature? Well, I mean, one issue with it being missable is sort of that eureka moment is just not going to be experienced by the whole audience of this puzzle. But on the other hand, the fact that the secret is missable somehow makes it more valuable. It creates this feeling whenever you're solving one of this author's puzzles, let's say, that there might just always be something lurking around the corner. And when you do find it, it's more of a surprise. And as we learned earlier, the sort of more surprising or unexpected something is, the more exciting it is, the more dopaminergic it is, the more sparkle is there. So the fact that the secrets are missable provides sort of additional excitement when you do find it. Another thing that missable secrets can do, especially in video games, is they can provide a reason to sort of go back to an old game. Like if I go back to a game like Chrono Trigger, which is an RPG from the 90s, there are things you can discover in that game that you didn't discover when you played it the first time, whether it's a line of dialogue or it's a sort of a hidden item that you just never knew was there. There are so many things and so much depth in a good RPG that you can play it multiple times. And I think some puzzle games like The Witness are starting to incorporate more and more of this into their games as well, which is great. Lesson number 13, Aporia is a promise of surprise. Aporia is a statement when you're solving a puzzle where you as a solver believe that the puzzle is impossible. You may even feel like you have a proof that it's impossible. I need to do this, but there's a catch. I just can't. What's the trick? This may also be called a known unknown, where you as a solver know that there is something that you don't know. You think that, well, I mean, this puzzle is in this game, or this person has, built and shipped this puzzle to me, which I have in my hands. It must have a solution, and yet I've convinced myself that I believe it has no solution. A simple example is with this puzzle here that I created. I'll show you how it works. Let's switch to the full cam. This object right here we'll call the cage, and there are 2 other parts which I will call A and B. Here's A. It's sort of got the L-shaped Tetris piece connected to the S-shaped, and this is B. B sort of has this 3-way junction up near the top, and the goal is to sort of put A and B into the cage. And well, let's just slide A in. You can kind of put it in like that. And that's the only place it goes. It's very easy to see that. And then you try and put B in, and it just it won't fit. There's not enough room to slide it in. You could try putting it in from the bottom. There's no room to put it in there either. Okay, well, maybe you don't put A in first. Maybe you have to put B in first. And you can try that. Here's B in. We'll just slide it down there. But then you have to put A in, and you can kind of see where it goes, right? Like it's kind of wrap around there and slide in there, but you can't slide it in. There's no way to make it work. So it's not A before B, and it's not B before A. Well, then it must be impossible, right? But no, actually the solution is you take B and you put it in kind of halfway, and you stick it up there. And then you can kind of just put A in halfway and slide it in the back, and then B comes down, and there we go. And then it's solved. So, the trick is you have to put A in halfway. Back to the presentation. So, and this isn't a difficult puzzle. This might be a level 1 or a level 2 puzzle. It's not particularly challenging, but it illustrates the point of the obvious things lead to a non-solution to the puzzle. And you might even be convinced, like, well, then this puzzle is impossible. You can't put A in first, you can't put B in first. So clearly it's impossible. Well, okay, but there was something that you didn't notice. The state of aporia, this state of feeling like the puzzle is impossible, or simultaneously believing both that, well, I think it's impossible, but yet the puzzle is in front of me and a solution has been promised. It creates this idea that an interesting trick exists. It sort of promises you that a powerful eureka moment is coming and primes you for the discovery of something really cool. And that mystery and anticipation is really motivating. Like, there's a big reveal coming and you can now anticipate it. And the sort of state of anticipating a reward or anticipating a eureka moment is, it can be more motivating and more dopaminergic than actually getting the reward. And so this state of aporia is highly motivating. And when a player is convinced that they're just on the cusp of a really cool discovery, that could be a time where they're very unlikely to quit and very likely to remember and want to share that discovery once they found it. And be very excited by it. So aporia is a great trick. I will show you an example. This is from a game called Pipe Push Paradise by Corey Martin a few years back. This is a puzzle where you sort of have to push these pipes around, and in this puzzle in particular, on the left here, you have this pipe with water flowing out, and you have to connect it to the one on the right. And you might realize, well, okay, so you just have to make this U shape with these two pieces. You can sort of flip and rotate the pieces around. The problem is that when you get to this state, you can't leave the puzzle. And you have to both connect the pipes up and have a way of exiting. In this case, the exit is out the bottom, but you just can't get down there. And, once you've played with this puzzle a bit, you can realize that there's no way to be at the puzzle, at the bottom of this puzzle, while also having the pipes in this configuration. There's just no last move that could have created this configuration and leave you at the bottom. You could never have pushed those pipes up into that configuration because there wouldn't have been a place for you to stand. And one of the things that you'll observe if you're playing around with this puzzle enough is that you can actually rotate the pipes into a different configuration where they're out in 3 dimensions. This is a 3-dimensional puzzle solving game where the rotations sometimes take things up off of the floor. This prompts you to find the real solution, which is actually to make the archway in the 3rd dimension such that you can walk under it and leave the puzzle. And this is a very memorable solution. But the thing that sort of primes you for this surprise is going back to your first attempt at the solution and realizing this ain't going to work. And perhaps even being so puzzled by it that you might leave the puzzle, go try something else, and then come back once you've realized that, well, all the other puzzles had solutions. This one must have one, but what am I not thinking of? And that final surprise is just so memorable, both because it's an exciting surprise, but also because of the fact that you couldn't solve it any other means. Now, in order to make this work, you have to do this, which is our 14th lesson, cultivate the trust of the solver. And one example of where this comes up is, say you're on the puzzle subreddit or the puzzling stack exchange, and you just click on a random interesting puzzle, and it looks cool, but you play around with it a bit and it looks impossible. And maybe you've even convinced yourself that it must be impossible. You have a proof that it's impossible. Maybe there's a really cool eureka moment lurking beneath the surface that you just didn't discover yet. But on the other hand, maybe just there's a rule missing, there's a piece missing. Maybe the person who made this puzzle screwed up, or maybe the poster of the puzzle screwed up and just forgot to include something. Maybe it's intended to be impossible. Maybe it's, one of these famous Königsberg Bridge style puzzles that literally has no solution, and discovering why is sort of the interesting part of it. And I've literally seen all of the above on these websites. But if it's from a source that I trust or it has a lot of upvotes, then maybe it's worth pursuing anyway. But the ability for me to trust that this puzzle is actually something interesting is often limited if it's just, a random post on a random website from somebody I don't know. And I might give up on it before I actually push forward and find that interesting eureka moment. This happens a lot in video games, especially action-adventure games and Metroidvania. Let's say you see an interesting puzzle. There's this heart piece being teased over here in the corner in Zelda. Can I get it right now? Maybe I'm missing an item. Maybe I have to come back once I find the hookshot or the glider or whatever. Maybe there's an ability I don't have. Maybe the world itself will change. Maybe, in Act 3, there'll be moving platforms and mushrooms sprouting here that I can jump on. Maybe when I become adult Link instead of child Link, I'll be able to jump that far. Maybe the game has a bug. This has happened to me so many times where I play an indie puzzle game the first week it comes out and it just hasn't had a patch yet, and there's some kind of issue with one of the puzzles where I just can't solve it. And the problem with that is once that happens to you once, you no longer have any trust in the rest of the game. Like every time you get stuck on a puzzle, you might just think, well, what if the game's bugged again, right? It puts you in a state where you're no longer sort of following that drip feed of like, oh, I'm just on the cusp of something exciting, I just need to push forward a little bit. Instead, there's this sort of unhealthy skepticism that robs you of that motivating force to continue going. In this case, for this Zelda puzzle, it turns out you can get it at this stage of the game. You just have to go grab a chicken, and you have to carry the chicken up quite a ways, but then you can sort of use it to sail over there, because when you're holding the chicken, you fall much less slowly. And so it in fact does have a solution, but that may not be obvious to you until much later in the game. A way of dealing with this that Superland used was to actually have NPCs that tell you, you have everything you need to solve this puzzle, go for it. And this happens at multiple times in the game. In some cases, you'll even reach an area where you can no longer go back. Like you have to fall off something and it locks you in a room with an NPC says you could solve this puzzle right now, and then you just have to do it. And Superland is a Metroidvania where you're constantly getting new items that add new abilities or affordances to the player. And so you might often come to a puzzle that you can't solve and say, well, maybe I just have to come back once I get an item. And so if that were the case for every puzzle in the game, then the puzzles that gate your progression, the player might just turn around and go do something else. And so something like this is in fact necessary to sort of tell the player, no, you need to push forward on this one puzzle. Even though it's hard, you can do it. And Superland was a very highly reviewed game. It was 96% positive on Steam. It was one of my favorite puzzle games of this whole year. But many people might think this is breaking the fourth wall. It's a little bit distasteful. There's some kind of dissonance going on here between the character and the player and what's happening. And David Munich is a very experienced puzzle creator. He was the creator of the original Not Prawn, which was the most famous internet riddle of sort of the Flash internet era back in the early to mid 2000s. And so he's been creating puzzles for a long time and understands very well the experience that a solver goes through when they're solving a puzzle. And he felt it was necessary to do this because he wanted to preserve the sanctity of the player's trust that the puzzle itself is solvable, while also making a Metroidvania where you're getting new items all the time that do new things. So an interesting solution to the problem. A related idea is that of square dealing, which it's a term that I've seen in crossword communities and other puzzle communities, but it basically refers to the conventions that the constructors of puzzles are abiding by to play fair. And you'll see many of these conventions. For example, in puzzle hunts, they will never have anagrams without a clue. And the reason is because when you're doing a puzzle hunt puzzle, these are typically puzzles where the rules are not provided, and you have to figure out what it is that you need to do. You might literally try anagramming everything. You could dump every word in this puzzle, the title of every puzzle, whatever, into anagram generators and just come up with nothing, or come up with something that's maybe tenuously there but turns out to be nothing. And that experience as a solver is not a pleasant experience. So to save the solver from having to do that, the authors of Puzzle Hunt puzzles will just tell you right up front there are no unclued anagrams in this puzzle hunt, and that will be part of the rules that are communicated to the player. Cryptic crosswords have a similar convention where they don't do indirect anagrams, which is basically like if there's an anagram, it has to be clued by a trigger word and it can't be mixed with another type of hint. Escape rooms have some conventions like one key, one lock. If you get a 4-digit code, you're never going to have to put it in multiple different 4-digit combination locks because, again, that would just be irritating. Do you want the player to have to retry everything over and over again? No. So one key, one lock is sort of a convention that saves the sanity of some players. Now, whether or not this is advertised or told to the players before they begin, it's kind of 50-50. It depends on which escape room you're doing. No outside knowledge is another common convention. But it's sort of like if you're a solver of cryptics, you probably realize this no indirect anagrams rule, even if it's just subconsciously, because you just never see it, right? You just realize that, oh, well, they wouldn't print that. I don't have to do that. But beginners may not understand this and may never even really have learned it unless somebody taught them. So beginners can spend a lot of time on cryptics just trying stuff that is never possibly necessary because they don't understand the conventions of the genre, right? So square dealing is important, but in video games especially, it's also important to communicate those rules to the player because every puzzle game you play will have different rules about how the puzzles are designed and what's allowed and what's not. And sometimes it's not that explicit. Some games actually tell the player, and this is a game called It'll Do, which is sort of a Zelda-like, and after you exit the first dungeon, it literally tells you there's no missable items or chests in dungeons at all. And not every Zelda-like has these types of conventions. In classic Zeldas, usually the convention is there's no need to return to dungeons later, meaning that every item that you could get in a dungeon is one that you could get with sort of the key or progression items from that dungeon and earlier and the prerequisites. Although that's not true in every Zelda, and it's not true in every dungeon of every Zelda. So having that type of square dealing is useful, and communicating it to the player can really help build that trusting relationship that allows the player to sort of press on when they're stuck on a puzzle. The sort of contrapositive to that is avoid cheap tricks. I'm going to pick on the Talos principle. When it released, it had a puzzle where, well, this isn't one of the main puzzles in the game. It's actually one of the bonus puzzles that you have to get stars for. But one of the stars, and it's very early on in the game, it's in the first major area of the fourth world of that, there is a hidden reflector up in a tree that you have to aim a laser at. And up until this point in the game, all the reflectors are just items on the ground. You can pick them up and move them. This one is stationary and it's in a tree. And in no other part of the game do you ever have to look up in the tree for anything. And there are so many other things that you can try to solve this puzzle that almost barely work. I literally wasted, more than an hour trying to get this thing. And then to learn that the answer was, well, it was in a tree, that was kind of upsetting. But also it made me distrust the developer because for every other puzzle in that game, instead of pressing on when I was stuck, I just had this thought, well, what if it's some more bullshit like that reflector in the tree? It turns out that after the game launched, they actually patched it, and they changed that reflector in the tree to a reflector on a very prominent salient pillar that you could see from all directions that made it clear that there was a reflector up there. And then it became a mystery of, well, what's that reflector on the pillar for? Turns out one of the secret bonus stars. And this is sort of a much more honest way of designing this puzzle, and it prevents that player's mind from being poisoned by, well, am I going to have to look in a tree forever? I'm going to quote my good friend Wei Hua, who said, a good puzzle has an aha moment, a bad puzzle has an oh really moment. Wei Hua is the 4-time world puzzle champion, and he's been published everywhere. He's done crosswords for New York Times, he's done World Puzzle Championship stuff, he's a game designer as well, and done physical puzzles. This guy is one of the most experienced puzzle creators I know, and for him, this oh really moment, this discovery of like it was that all along, is a very negative experience when you're expecting or hoping instead for an exciting eureka. Bob Bates refers to that as poisoning of the well. Bob Bates designed a lot of adventure games, point-and-click games for Infocom and Legend Entertainment in the late 80s and 90s. And Bob actually gave a GDC talk where he sort of emphasized that a good understanding of puzzle design theory was necessary to avoid this pitfall of creating a state in players where there's sort of this unhealthy skepticism that the designers aren't playing fair. And here, here's just a general list of things to avoid. Anything that requires you to do lots of searching without a clue. Darkness is a big one. If there are dark corners of your game and literally the player has to walk into every one of them, or even walk into every one of them and jump in order to find that hidden nook where you might have hidden something, that can be irritating. Wall pressing, if the player has to touch every wall, shoot every wall, press the action button on every wall. If there are invisible platforms, the player can't see them and they just have to jump randomly to see where there might be an invisible platform. Those types of experiences can be very draining for players, because instead of feeling like they're on the right track, they're feeling like they're just sort of laboriously searching the entire possible game for the thing you might have hidden if they want to sort of complete the puzzles. So you never want to do this. And the other thing that can happen is, like, say you had a clue which illustrated, oh, well, you're going to have to jump in the dark. Maybe the player didn't see that clue and they just happened to wander that way and find it. The problem is, if the player comes out and realizes, well, there was no clue, I guess I have to check every dark zone anywhere. That is sort of an equal well poisoning, right? So you not just have to make sure you put the clue, you have to make sure that the player can't get there without the clue. You have to make sure the clue is somehow sort of obvious, or at least maybe when the player's coming back out, they will then see the clue. A way to avoid that. You don't want to have puzzles that suddenly increase tenuousness, like force the player to do something they never had to do, force the player to look outside the game when they never had to look outside the game, some kind of new trick or method that is suddenly used or required, especially if it's a one-off. If you only have to use it once, well, will the player now be paranoid that they have to use it again? Will they try it on every other puzzle in the rest of the game? You want to make sure that you don't have that situation. Inconsistency in general, if the rules are changing, then players will never know whether they can expect their understanding of the game, their conceptual model for how the game systems work, to be correct. If they're questioning the conceptual model, then they're not in a good space to do problem solving, right? You want players to feel that they rock solid understand the game's rules, the game's logic, and are then solving things rather than questioning that. At least if you're making a game that's about logic or about understanding rules. There are some games that are just not about that, and that's okay. There are some games that are just about rule discovery, but that brings us to point number 15, which is be careful with intransparencies. An intransparency of a puzzle is any aspect that is not explained to the solver, a hidden rule, a hidden goal, maybe a hidden affordance, meaning a hidden thing that the player can do, or a hidden interaction or hidden consequence of a certain interaction. Intransparencies can also come in the form of the inability to perceive or interpret the state of the puzzle. And essentially, if you're familiar with the quote-unquote 7 stages of action, which I think Don Norman was the one who initially made that a popular idea. Any one of those 7 stages of action can have a failure where due to intransparency, the person trying to perform an action just doesn't understand something, right? I will show you an example. This is a puzzle. I have it right here. It's called the Remove Octahedron. And this puzzle is a puzzle that your goal is to try and disassemble it. And sort of get into it. And you can kind of like move one of the parts around, but most of them don't really move. And if you listen carefully, you can hear that there's something going on the inside of it, but you can't see what it is, right? So this is an example of an intransparency in a puzzle. Another example would be instructionless puzzles. This puzzle on the left is from a round of the German National Puzzle Championship, which is how they select their team for World Puzzle Championships. And they had an instructionless round. And how it works is you're given an empty sort of input puzzle, and then you're given its solution. And your goal is to work out what is the rule where this input could lead to this solution, and it's unique. There is no other solution to this puzzle. And sometimes that uniqueness is an important part of discovering what the rules are. And then, of course, they'll give you an actual contest puzzle that you have to solve. And all of this, including both discovering the instructions and solving the puzzle, you're doing under time pressure. In this case, the rule is that the number tells you of its 4 cardinal neighbors in the north, south, east, west direction, how many of them are different, or how many different numbers are represented there. So a 1... this 1 has 2 3s next to it. It only has one unique neighbor, whereas this 4 has all 4 of 1, 2, 3, 4 as its neighbors. Another example is this game Understand, which is a Steam game where they give you a bunch of symbols on the grid and you have to figure out the rules. The Witness also has this instructionlessness as a part of sort of the early phase of the game when you're learning what the rules are, rather than the later phase of the game where you're solving puzzles using those known rules. Mystery hunt puzzles are basically all instructionless. They tend to give you some input and then find something to solve. This is one from this year's Mystery Hunt where the input was a picture of a bunch of diagrams of what look like sound devices or digital synthesizers, and you get a bunch of these, and then you also get these like random strings of letters, some of which are red colored. And it turns out that you have to download this software that sort of allows you to put together Eurorack style modular synths and put them together this way, and they would all make synth noises from popular songs. Like a synth from Lady Gaga or from Eurythmics or from whatever. And then these things on the right corresponded to the melodies that you had to play, and then you had to put the melodies together and get a secret message from that, and then there was a whole second part to it. But the point is that the rules are not given at all. And figuring out the rules, figuring out what you have to do, and getting that aha moment of, oh, these are songs, I have to play them, that is part of the magic of MIT Mystery Hunt, is discovering what it is that you have to do. And intransparencies can be a huge amount of fun, but there are many caveats. They can cause solvers to become stuck, and I've heard this called enigma syndrome or a few other things, where you literally just don't know what to do because you failed to put 2 and 2 together. And that tends to be an unfun kind of stuck for many puzzles because you don't necessarily have different approaches or different things to try. There isn't really a recourse for you if you just can't figure out what you need to do. If you're making a linear story-based game where the puzzles have to come in sequence, then getting stuck means blocking progression in the game, which literally means the player cannot play anymore unless they either look up the solution or cheat, or they just have to quit and come back tomorrow. And some players, they really don't want to look up the solution, right? But if they're going to be very devout about that, then they just can't play the game anymore, right? They literally may just stop there and never play beyond that. You can see with the completion statistics of many puzzle games on Steam, especially if they have achievements, you can see, everybody quit after this achievement because there was a really hard puzzle there that got stuck. On the other hand, if you're making a linear game and you want to avoid that, you may end up taking every puzzle that is remotely difficult and kind of sanding off the difficulty or adding hints, and those may make it a less pleasurable experience for some other players that really want the challenge, right? So you're having to balance all of these goals together if you make a linear game. Another common complaint is that these intransparencies can feel like an IQ test. It feels like, I just have to figure out what the pattern is, and some players don't want that to be their puzzle-solving experience. The resolution of the intransparency is also a one-time reveal. You can't make 100 puzzles that are based on one intransparency. You have to have 100 different intransparencies, and so it can be hard to come up with that. They're also easily spoiled, especially if somebody is playing on live streaming service like Twitch. One person in the chat can just tell them the answer, and then it's all over. So intransparencies are often not that great. And the reverse can also be bad. If the streamer knows what's going on or knows the answer, but the audience doesn't, then they'll just have to constantly explain the rules to them, which can make the streaming experience a bit worse. A very common example is the hidden affordance, which is where you have some kind of affordance or thing you can do that is not tutorial to you or not told to you. And this is an example from the Wind Waker. You get this grappling hook and it sort of tells you how to use it and you can swing on things. But there is another thing you can do with that, and that is when you are swinging, you can also stop swinging and climb the rope. And when I was playing this game, I never even knew you could do this. And the method to do it is actually a little bit counterintuitive. You have to hold the button that in the top right, the ZR button here, which basically stops you from swinging. And then while holding that, you have to press up to climb the rope. And normally when you press up, you press like up and down to swing back and forward and time your swings to move forward. So there's a second movement assigned to the same button, and you have to climb up to the top of this rope. And now it's only required in a couple areas of the game to get a couple of secrets. But, I want 100% the dungeon. I want to find all the secrets. So it was really annoying to me that this was never explained, and then I just had to figure it out. And it's counterintuitive. And they also, this was a port of the game, an HD port of the game from the original GameCube to the Wii U. And so they had to change the controls. So they may have not tested it enough. They may have not done their focus testing to discover that this was a stuck point, or they might have just left it in because it was only for a couple of puzzles anyway. But for some players, this is very frustrating, and it can really make you distrust the developers. And normally you don't see stuff like this in Zelda because it's quite well tested. But in this one case, it was really, there are people online who raged about this quite a bit. One of the ways you can avoid that is tip number 16, which is to facilitate experimentation. And I will show the remove octahedron again as a way of illustrating this. Basically, like, it's clear that there's something rattling around on the inside of it. And it's clear that if you kind of try to push it this way, you can push it a little, but it gets stuck. And you can listen, and you can discover that, oh, okay, there's some balls on the inside or something moving around. And if you move it very slowly and listen, you can even try and hear what is the shape of the cavity inside this puzzle. How many balls are there? Are they in the same cavity or are they not? And you can learn all of these things just by experimenting and slowly moving the thing around in information. So the intransparency of what's in the middle can be made transparent by your own interaction with the puzzle. You know, and you will in fact discover in this puzzle that there are 2 balls inside. They are in the same chamber, and that chamber has the shape of an S Tetris piece, and you have to get the balls at the 2 opposite sides of it because the thing you're pushing down goes in the middle. So you kind of have to do a spin move to get the 2 balls to the opposite side to push it down, which is an interesting eureka moment, but one that you can actually kind of deductively logic yourself toward if you experiment with it enough to discover how it works. A rule of thumb that goes along with this is avoid making experimentation frustrating. I remember as a kid playing Link to the Past and getting to this boss, the Helmasaur King. And this boss is really tough. He comes at the end of a long gauntlet of difficult enemies that you have to get through. And if you die, you have to restart the whole dungeon and do it all over again. And he is the first boss that you cannot defeat using the sword alone. Every other boss up until that point, you could just use the sword on them. But this guy, you have to use the hammer on him first. And, you know, it's the usual Zelda trope. Use the item from that dungeon to defeat the boss of that dungeon. But this was the first time that idea was used in this game. And I remember being so frustrated that I would get to this boss, fight him, my sword would do nothing, and I didn't know what to do, and I would just die because this guy just hits so hard. And, you know, I would try that a few times, die, get frustrated, and then not know what to do because I wasn't able to easily experiment and figure out what the boss's weak point was. The experimentation required all of this effort beforehand. And I remember going to my cousin and begging him to tell me how to beat this boss, and he told me, hit his mask with the magic hammer. And I still, as an adult, remember those exact words that he used because as a child, this was so pertinent and so salient to me when I'm like fighting this boss and was literally blocked by progressing in the game because I didn't know that secret. And certainly that was a huge eureka moment for me, just being told the answer because it was so important to being able to progress in this game. But the thing that caused that frustration was the fact that I couldn't experiment, or at least that experimentation required so much effort that I was never able to get there on my own. Another example, and I love this, by the way, is the Hearthstone Puzzle Labs, which was an expansion to the Hearthstone game made, I think, a year or 2 ago. And there are a bunch of these puzzles that you have to solve using Hearthstone cards, and they're very interesting, very exciting. I highly recommend this, even if you've never played Hearthstone. But this particular puzzle is a doozy. It's called The Test, and there is this unit on the board called the test subject, and it has the property that whenever it dies, it gives you a copy of every spell you've ever played on it. And there is also a spell that you have in this called Vivid Nightmare that copies a minion. And when you copy a minion, it kind of also copies the triggers that are attached to that minion. So there's this very sophisticated interaction of creating copies of spells via minions that you've copied. And there are also a bunch of spells that you have that change the health of minions and kill them and do various things. So the solution to this puzzle, you know, you only have 10 cards in your hand, but you actually may end up playing 20 or 30 of them to actually go through with it. And for each one of the cards you play, you have to sort of watch through its animation. Sometimes there's voice lines. And the order of operations is very important, and even learning what the priority of things are, like when a death happens, in what order do the triggers happen, that order of trigger interaction is relevant in this puzzle. And the first time I solved this puzzle, or actually the first time I put together a solution that I thought would solve this puzzle, it turned out that it didn't work due to some subtlety of the interactions that I didn't know. And this was immensely frustrating, but what's even more frustrating is that that thing on the right over there is not an undo button. It is a reset button. There is no undo in this puzzle. And when you reset, it clears the whole board. It plays an unskippable 8-second animation. There's a voice line that comes from the boss on the other side who makes fun of you. And it's just the experience of experimenting to learn what happens is made very tedious by the interface. And Hearthstone isn't a puzzle game. It is a game that's very much about sort of the charming whimsy of the interaction of these cards in a magical universe, and those voice lines are part of what makes Hearthstone Hearthstone. But in the context of a puzzle game, it sort of became very irritating for me to actually interface with the puzzle itself. So it's something to keep in mind that if you make experimentation frustrating, and if you make sort of learning the underlying system of the puzzle difficult or frustrating, or place obstacles in front of the player of doing that, then the player may never get to the heart of the puzzle and may just give up, right? They won't be driven to continue playing by the exciting thing around the corner. They'll just be like, ugh, I can't be bothered. One solution to avoid making experimentation necessary at all is to show the player things that they would otherwise have to find out. Don't put a button on the ground and make the player stand on it to see what it does. Put a line next to the button and a little indicator on the wall that can show the player what the puzzle is going to do when they step on it. This is something that Portal did, a decade and a half ago. It'll does something even more interesting, where whenever you hit a locked door or a locked gate, it will show these little particles that travel from the locked gate to either the buttons on the floor or the switches that you have to hit in order to activate it. And this removes the need for you to figure out what combination of switches you need to hit to open this door. Games like Drawd, Deadly Rooms of Death also do the same thing. So a related idea is always try to get the solver on the right path. Realizing that you're on the right track is one of the most dopaminergic things, just in the same way that anticipating, a eureka moment being right around the corner is really interesting. Sort of being on the right track and being told that you're on the right track is similarly very motivating. In American crosswords, every letter is checked, meaning that every letter exists in both a horizontal and vertical word. And when you get that confirmation, and yes, this is the same letter when I've solved both of these clues, it gives you this sort of satisfaction that you're moving forward, that you're making correct progress. Many crossword clues, they may have multiple possible answers, right? There may be multiple possible words that are 4 letters long and satisfy this clue. But as we've sort of seen in some of the earlier examples, only one of them is correct, and you may not know which one it is until you get this confirmer. But the confirmer is sort of a push to keep going and motivation to understand that you're on the right track. Cryptics actually do this within individual clues. So in cryptic crosswords, if you don't know, every clue actually contains both a literal definition and a sort of pun or cryptic definition. So you might see a 7-letter word for terrain scrambled coach, and you split it down the middle. A coach is a trainer, but the word terrain scrambled, i.e. anagrammed, is also the word trainer. So within every individual clue, you have a confirmer because you have 2 sides of it that make the answer. And sometimes when you're solving a cryptic, you won't necessarily solve both of them. Like you might solve the literal clue and not solve the other one and sort of check it by the letter crossings. Cryptics have fewer letter crossings than American crosswords. But sometimes the answer kind of reveals what the pun was and can create this exciting moment of, oh, I get it, it's terrain scrambled. So it provides additional sparkle. Whoops. Okay, we're back. Let's see. Puzzle hunts often also have confirmers, where sometimes you're halfway through a puzzle and you got somewhere and you think maybe is this the answer, and then you type it into the answer box, and instead of saying good job you solved the puzzle, it says keep going. And what keep going means in that context is that that's not the answer, it's another clue. It's something that you can move forward on in a different direction, something new you have to try. But that can also be very motivating because it means everything you've done up until now was something that was intended for you to do. A related question that I often get is, are red herrings bad? Should you avoid them? And I mean, this is a very complicated subject. There are a lot of different types of red herrings, and whether or not they're bad is very situational. A dressing is a name for sort of a needless, non-pertinent decoration that's salient enough that the solver might accidentally interpret it as pertinent. In chess puzzles, for example, if you just add extra pieces that are not relevant to the solution and don't prevent any wrong solutions from being relevant, then those are considered dressings, and they're often frowned upon because they may distract the solver from what they actually need to do. Same thing in escape rooms. Like, people often want to decorate the escape room and make it look nice, but players may see bars in a jail and try and, count them and put that as a number in some combination lock, right? Like, you got to really make sure that your dressings are not interpreted as pertinent. Distractors are affordances that you never need. There's an example like make 35 cents with 10 coins. And the quarter is not needed. Therefore, it is a distractor. It's an affordance that you didn't need. But it sort of feels like it should be there, right? It's not a red herring that's going to confuse you. Fake puzzles and ghost puzzles are things that come up in escape rooms where you see something that looks like a puzzle, but it turns out not to be. A ghost puzzle is a puzzle that used to be in the room and then was removed, but somehow there's some little bit of it that's left that wasn't cleaned up. You might just see a shadow on the wall of where something was, or you might see some parts of what used to be a puzzle, but they've been disconnected and are no longer part of the solution. Every escape room fan will tell you that they've seen these, and they get so mad when that wasn't taken out of the room, because they'll spend their time, which an escape room is precious, you only have an hour to get out, they'll spend their time trying to figure out what to do with that thing, and if it turns out, oh, you didn't have to do anything, it wasn't part of the puzzle, then that really irritates people. It feels like they've been robbed of their time. Obfuscation and misdirection come in many forms and can be sometimes interpreted as red herrings, but sometimes it's more like showing the solver what is a non-solution so that they can appreciate the solution more, right? There's various ways that misdirection can actually be good. So you don't want to rule that out as bad. Dead-end approaches are any approach that you might try to solve a puzzle that immediately leads to a negative confirmer, meaning you try something and then you learn, oh, this cannot be the approach. This cannot possibly work. There is a clear dead end here. The opposite is a rabbit trail, which is an incorrect approach to solving a puzzle that cannot be proven not to work. You might be in some block pushing game and it turns out you have to do this one thing, but you're trying this other thing. And it seems like you're maybe making progress and you're trying a few more things and, it's just branching and getting deeper and maybe you're making progress, maybe you're not. But an hour later, you're still trying that one thing and you haven't quite got to the exit. And maybe it's impossible, right? But you don't know. You don't have an obvious proof that's impossible. So you waste an hour trying something that isn't the intended or correct solution. Rabbit trails are the most demotivating, especially for novices, because novices are not particularly good at guessing what will work or guessing what the intended solution method to a puzzle will be. They may spend a long time and only change their approach when they've really just given up and been beaten down into thinking, well, I don't want to try this anymore. To address this, like really sealing off rabbit trails is a good idea. If you're playtesting something and you notice that players are spending a long time trying an approach that doesn't work, you should probably either prevent them from trying it or add a negative confirmer of some kind. Go back, this isn't the solution, not like this, try something else. And to discover those, you really need to playtest it. The sort of lesson expressed in 4 words is match pertinence with salience. Pertinence meaning things that are relative to the actual solution of the puzzle, things that are either clueful or are affordances that you need or are interactions that you need to do. And salience meaning how much something sticks out, how clear is it to the player that this is important, how important looking is something. Things that are important should stick out. Things that stick out should be important. You do not want to have negatives in either direction. You don't want to have important things that are subtle, or at least are more subtle than everything else in the environment. And you don't want to have things that stick out and look like they might be clueful or might be puzzly that turn out not to be. And keep in mind that video game players especially, who are not necessarily experts at puzzles, they may not have the conventions in place that allow them to determine what is clueful. Like when you're solving an escape room and you've done 50 of them, you probably can guess whether or not something is clueful. If you're doing a mystery hunt puzzle and you've done hundreds of them and you see something, you can probably guess whether or not that's supposed to be a clue or whether it's supposed to be just, flavor text, flavor art, not relevant. But newer players are not able to make that distinction, especially in video games, because video games have conventions that change so much from genre to genre that it's very hard for players to know what they know or know what they're expected to know or know what the game designer is expecting them to interpret. So always try to match pertinence with salience as much as you can. next lesson is to seek depth in systems and rule sets. This is a lesson that comes from physical puzzle games, particularly those published by publishers like ThinkFun and Smart Games. They have this interesting method of putting together physical puzzles. Rather than getting just, one puzzle like one of these that you buy, they have a kit that comes with different items that you can put together, and then they'll have a booklet or a set of cards that contain challenges. And each puzzle will come with, say, 50 to 100 different challenges of increasing difficulty, almost in the same kind of progression that you would see in a traditional video game. And so Rush Hour, you're sort of moving these cars around, you have to get the red car out of the grid, and there's just 50 different configurations of obstacles for it, each of which you have to solve. And so it's a nice experience for somebody buying these because there's sort of more content. It's not just one puzzle. It also can make manufacturing much cheaper because you sort of have to just make the set of parts once and then make the 50 puzzles. The cards are really cheap to make 50 of, and you don't have to make 50 copies of the game board. It also allows the player to have a conceptual model, meaning develop a sophisticated understanding of what the pieces are, how they work, how they move around. Once you have a eureka moment or a discovery of an emergent consequence of that system, you can reuse that knowledge in future puzzles, and puzzles can therefore build upon one another with increasingly complicated sort of lemmas and templates and theorems that the player can learn as they're solving this puzzle, and as they develop a more and more detailed model of what are the consequences of this system. So you get depth and you also get consistency in the design. And the emergent surprises can be much, much deeper than just some sort of one-off on-the-surface trick. Something like the remove octahedron, that's sort of one trick that you can use one time. But in systems-based puzzles, you can have many different tricks that arise from the same situation. This can make the eureka moments sort of more exciting because they're more surprising because there's more depth behind them. They can also reduce the cost of content creation because you only have to make one of these cards, and designing a new instance of a puzzle is often a lot less difficult than designing a new rule set or a new gimmick for a new puzzle completely. I'll give you another example, which is from Thomas Snyder. He's a 3-time World Sudoku champion, World Puzzle champion. He's the founder of Grandmaster Puzzles, which is a company that publishes a puzzle blog as well as many puzzle books and puzzle magazines. He's also a mentor to many people on topics relating to puzzle design. He's an advisor on my latest project. He has this idea, which he's described to me as sort of the capacity of a puzzle, or the sort of space available to within a certain puzzle type to express ideas of that puzzle. And the way he describes it is in 2 different ways which are equivalent. How many can you create of this puzzle type before you start repeating the same tricks over and over again? Like, say you're doing Sudoku. How many Sudokus can you make before the solution to the Sudokus is just going to have no new ideas? And the answer is it's probably somewhere between 50 and 100. It might be like 80 Sudokus. He also describes it as how many of this puzzle type he would actually want to do in his life. Like, say somebody made the perfect puzzle book of Sudoku puzzles, let's say, and tried to include all of the interesting Sudoku tricks in there, but not really repeat them much. How many puzzles would that book have in it? It's not 1,000 Sudoku puzzles. It's much less. And different puzzle types have different capacities. A simple 2-dimensional maze, you can do one of them and then you sort of learn, well, okay, follow the right-hand side or whatever. There's not that much to do. Something like a portal gun may only really support 10 different unique eureka moments. Sudoku might be more like 100, and a game like The Witness could be 10 times that just because it has so many different components that can go into those puzzle systems, different rules, different symbols and constraints within each puzzle. Go problems might be the deepest of them all. I think there are people who've solved 10,000 Go puzzles or more and are still finding unique and interesting ideas in new puzzles that they haven't seen before. And that's something a bit unique and remarkable about the game of Go, whose rules are very simple, but somehow there's this unexpected depth there where you can express tens of thousands of different ideas using this sort of basic Go rules. You might think, are there really only 10 portal gun puzzles? Like, Portal had more levels than that, right? Like, aren't there more ideas than that? Well, I mean, I'm talking about just the basic sort of portal gun and walls. There's not that many things you can do with it. Like, there's traversal, there's some line of sight shooting tricks, you can put a portal on the ceiling, there's the momentum conservation trick. There's a lot of tricks where you sort of move one portal but leave another in order to be able to get back to a place where you were before. But very quickly you start running out of ideas to make truly unique puzzles, and then you start to add, you need to add new components, the death pits and the missile turrets and the companion cubes and the buttons you can push them on. And then in Portal 2 they add the light bridges and the anti-gravity spirals and the paint that you can paint on the walls to make them portable, and the bouncy colored goop that you can speed off of and bounce on. These new components are what's adding additional capacity to the puzzles to be able to express more unique eureka moments. But just the raw ingredients are not really that they can't speak to that many eureka moments. There's just not that much there. And what logic puzzle folks do is they often create hybrids and variants. These are all sort of variations on Sudoku. You can see here there's one where the regions are not square, there's a hex grid, there's a 3D-ish grid, or sort of on the surface of this isometric cube, and then increasingly complex variations, or hybrids as they are often called, where you're blending one type of puzzle like Sudoku with another type like a domino puzzle. And through hybrids and variations, you can sort of have limitless variety and endless eureka moments, because each of these puzzles sort of has its own rules and its own consequences and its own emergent complexity or lemmas that arise from that set of rules. There are some sort of common tropes in these: changing geometry or topology, moving from flat geometry to a cylinder or a torus, moving from a square grid to a triangle or a hex or whatever other grid type you want, adding new constraints and clue types, combining two puzzle types together, liar clues, exactly one of these clues is wrong, there's a wolf in sheep's clothing somewhere, cipher clues where you replace numbers in a grid with a set of letters and each letter corresponds to a unique number, off by one, or knapp daneben as it's often called, where every number in the grid is off by one. A 3 could be either a 2 or a 4. These are common ideas you'll see over and over again in logic puzzles. And they add a lot of depth and complexity, sort of new eureka moments. There's this question, like, where does depth come from in certain types of puzzle systems? Somehow Go is inherently deep, and it's very difficult to understand why it is so deep. There is this computational complexity answer, which is like, Go is NP complete or p-space complete, if you're familiar with complexity theory. And that sort of represents that Go can sort of encode other types of puzzles which are increasingly complex. And that may be true, but often the way you represent something very complex is like, building a circuit out of Go stones, and then like this circuit is only satisfiable if, player white wins in this Go situation. And those can be very contrived. What's unique about Go is that it's complex even with relatively simple constructions of, a little puzzle that takes up 1/4 of a Go board or less. Without necessarily a lot of contrivance, right? Games like Hearthstone have huge amount of contrivance to their puzzles because there's thousands of cards in the game. You'll never run out of puzzles to create because there's just so many cards there. And some games like The Witness or Baba Is You, they get away with the interaction between the different rules and constraints, giving you this emergent complexity. You may have n different rules, but there are sort of 2 to the n different ways that those can be combined together. And so you sort of, there are n squared ways, for example, that you can take a pair of rules and combine them, but sometimes even 3 or more will give you unique emergent eurekas that don't exist with 2 or less of the rules combined. Especially in a game like Baba Is You, where sometimes you need 5 rules put together and then something magical can happen. Level geometry is another thing that can give you really interesting, deep, emergent interactions. A few examples of this. One is Steven's Sausage Roll, which is a game where you're running around as this little character with a fork, skewering sausages, pushing them around, picking them up, and later, dragging them up ladders and doing interesting contortions with your body and various other things, which I almost don't want to spoil them because they're magical. I know I've been spoiling a lot of stuff in this talk. When you're talking about puzzle design, you invariably have to spoil things. But this is a game that is worth playing to the end, or at least learning all of the things that it does, because it's so remarkable. Like there's no new items you pick up when you're playing Steven Saucerroll. You don't open a chest and get the hook shot or the power glove. It's all just the base movement of the game. Two other games that are similar are Pipe Push Paradise and A Monster's Expedition, where you really just have sort of a simple move and push type of mechanic, but a lot of emergent complexity via the interactions that happen with the objects. In Pipe Push Paradise, you can sort of push pipes down into holes and roll them over while a piece of them goes into a hole and then comes back out. In A Monster's Expedition, you're rolling a log over another log and then pushing them into the water, and then while in the water, there's different things you can do with them. It's quite an interesting experience, and both of these games are massive rabbit holes to go down. A Monster's Expedition has like 500, 600, I don't know how many levels. It has a lot of levels, hundreds of them, containing dozens and dozens of unique ideas that are all consequences of basically just moving cylinders around. And if you have a sufficiently complex system, then just through changing the shape of levels, you can allow the player to experience all of these different things you can do without adding too much in the way of new mechanics or new things. I mean, all of these games do have new mechanics and new things, right? Steven Saucerroll at some point adds in ladders. Pipe Push Paradise at some point adds in the ability to rotate a pipe. Monster's Expedition at some point adds in rocks of different heights. But it doesn't add too much of them. There's a very low amount of new things, whereas some puzzle games, every 5 puzzles, they give you, a new toy to play with or a new ability to use. These games are very minimal on that, and instead try to explore the space of available ideas or consequences of those ideas as much as possible. Most of the sort of common puzzle tropes that you see over and over again in puzzle games are there because they combine two things. One is they're actually hard. They're sort of NP hard or P-space hard, or have some kind of actual complexity theoretic hardness to them, meaning they can encode many hard problems. But they aren't too chaotic and random. They're things that humans can reason about and facilitate deeper understanding of. Connectivity and paths. Human brains are just great at seeing when things are touching, when they're adjacent, when this blob is one thing instead of two things. Packing or covering, like shapes, mental rotation to fit things together. Perspective or line of sight, sort of 3D geometry of when something can be seen from something else. These are all things that human brains are just naturally good at reasoning about. Logic gates and state manipulation. These are just good examples of ways to get complexity in puzzle games, but also allow the puzzles to be things that have exciting eureka moments that humans can discover. Next lesson is to understand your puzzle's state space. And this lesson comes to us via a puzzle designer. This is, his name is Oscar van Deventer. And he makes a lot of different types of physical puzzles, twisty puzzles. He prototypes them himself with a 3D printer. He's got a YouTube channel, which is quite interesting to check out. He's very prolific. This is a puzzle that he worked on, which is published by a company called Hanayama Puzzles. It's the cast H&H, and there are these two H-shaped pieces which can kind of be stuck together and roll around one another in these interesting 3D ways. The goal is to separate the two pieces, but to do this requires a huge number of moves. And Oscar actually published the state diagram of this puzzle. These are sort of all the different configurations that these two pieces can be in. And the lines represent possible transitions from those states. So wherever there is a line, it means you can get the two puzzle pieces from that one state to the other one. And where there isn't a line, it means that somehow that transition has been blocked, either by a little nubby of the puzzle, a little piece of metal that kind of just prevents you from making that transition. And therefore, finding a solution to this puzzle is equivalent to finding a path through this graph from in to out along these edges. And creating this puzzle was basically a task of like snipping certain edges until the graph that remained was an interesting maze to navigate that didn't have too many dead ends, but also had some trails for you to wander down, which may or may not lead you to the correct thing. I'll show you another example from Sokoban. This is a paper by Peter Jaruszek and Radek Pelanek. And in this puzzle, they take a bunch of instances of Sokoban and they diagram their state space using a sort of node and edge graph representation where each node is an individual state of the puzzle and each edge is sort of a connection between those two states. And a state in this case consists of a location of where the boxes are and a connected region where the player is. So individual moves are not considered state changes unless they push a box. But as you can see with this puzzle, there's this really tight bottleneck down here, and that sort of is what makes this puzzle difficult. There is one unique sort of key move or trick that you have to do in order to get to the goal. And the coloring here is based on players trying to attempt to solve this puzzle and how much time they spent in each state of the puzzle. The size of the dot corresponds to how long players spent. And you could see that they spend a lot of time not getting through the bottleneck. And once they get through, there's hardly any time spent at all because they're immediately able to get to the goal. And so understanding that state diagram allows you to sort of control aspects of your puzzle by manipulating it. The larger the state space is, obviously the more difficult, the more possible states, but the bottlenecks are what create difficulty. And if you have multiple bottlenecks, that can make things even more difficult. This, in particular, this Sokoban puzzle is one that takes an average of 30 to 40 minutes for players to solve. This is a really nasty one. And that bottleneck is the reason. Could you imagine if this puzzle had a second one afterwards? Players could be here for a long time. So a related idea is to understand your puzzle's solution path. And when I say solution path, I don't necessarily mean just the path through that state diagram, but also the sort of the state of the player as they're solving the puzzle and what are all of the understandings or eureka moments that the player will go through. How are they going to make progress through your puzzle? Noah Falstein gave a talk in 2013 at GDC where he talked about these dependency diagrams that they used for adventure games of the puzzles. And this is sort of like the prerequisite chain of all the different things you had to do in order to get through this. This isn't even a whole game. This is like the intro sequence to this game. And one of the pieces of advice, sort of the main piece of advice he gave, was to make these diagrams bushy, meaning not a long linear prerequisite chain, but sort of a lot of different things that you could make process on concurrently without them sort of blocking each other as prerequisites. And the reason to do this was to allow the player to sort of explore and be able to make progress in multiple areas of the game without restricting them too much, without having that one single bottleneck which would force the player to do this one thing and everywhere else in the game is just kind of useless to them. Cameron Brown has this interesting illustration where he shows Slitherlink puzzles, and the rules of this puzzle are essentially you're given as input a grid made of dots and some numbers in there, and you have to draw a single closed loop around this grid, and the numbers indicate sort of the adjacency, how many edges of that loop are adjacent to the number. So for example, this 3 right here has 3 walls next to it. This 1 right here has 1. This 2 right here has 2. And Slitherlink exists in some video games as well. The Witness has a version of Slitherlink. There are some other games that have similar ideas. But here on the top, he's showing a computer-generated puzzle that was sort of randomly constructed. And on the bottom, there's a human-constructed puzzle. And the way in which the solver goes from the initial puzzle to the solution is very different for these two puzzles. On the bottom one, there's kind of 2 places you can make progress, and you sort of linearly do the bottom half of the loop and the top half of the loop, and then they meet together. Whereas this top one, you can start just about anywhere in any corner of the grid, and then you kind of get about this much before you then have to solve some more. Here's a bigger example of a human-constructed Slitherlink puzzle where there's sort of like 3 different places where you can make progress linearly, and then in the middle, they all come together and make the final solution to the puzzle. And so, as a solver, you can start in a couple of these different corners and make progress, but when you're going along each section, there's this sort of smooth flow of, oh, I did this, oh, now I get this, oh, now I get this, oh, now I get this. And it feels very exciting as a solver to feel that you're on the right track, and for every bit of progress to then unlock further progress, it sort of makes that progress feel even better, because in addition to solving part of the grid, you're also allowing yourself to solve another part of the grid. So it's very exciting. The linear solution path can be much harder, especially for a large puzzle, because you may not know where to start. If you have a big grid and there's literally only one place where you can make progress, then that can take a lot of time to find. Whereas if you have a bushy solution path, then the solver is less likely to be stuck. and can sort of proceed from more areas and feel like they're making progress sooner. But yeah, the linear solution paths can lead to sort of these interesting solution flows that can be more of a work of art and can be more exciting. Let's see. So yeah, this is an idea that we use internally working on our new game, which is how big is the puzzle grid versus how difficult it is. If it has few steps and it's trivially difficult, then it's whatever, it's boring, it's a tutorial puzzle, it's nothing. But the two types that are interesting are if you have many steps of low difficulty, we call this a flow puzzle, versus you have few steps but high difficulty, maybe only one difficult step, and sort of the whole puzzle is about figuring out that one difficult, interesting thing. We call that a gem puzzle. And of course, if you have many steps and high difficulty, then it's just a slog. It's going to be, it's going to take a long time. It's something you really got to get invested into. But the flowy puzzles and the gems are usually the most suitable for video games, and for us, they've been the most interesting. I'm going to take a break, and then we will come back for the final part.